part 2 of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, broadcasting on the same day, that is Friday, the 30th of September 2022. In part 1, which lasted about 17 minutes, we mainly focused on HS2 and the almost historic comment, almost historically honest and objective comment against HS2 made by Andrew Pierce of the Daily Mail, a very right-wing commentator and supporter of big business, etc. Whereas Kevin McGuire, his so-called rival from the Daily Mirror, stayed silent. And our thesis is that Keir Starmer will not make any seriously fundamental changes in the event, theoretically, if he gets in, as he claimed to Beth Rigby of the Sky News as the next prime minister. The hype around the Labour Party's possible electoral success is, of course, conditional on many things. If the Conservatives sack Liez Truss and ditch Kwasi, the nephew Tom Kwarteng, and replace them with something else, they might be doing that in the hope that they will be able to reverse the historic, monumental catastrophe that Kwarteng and Liez Truss have already achieved in less than 2 weeks. But that again is not certain. Even if they change these two, it is not certain that there will be a resumption of what might be called the kind of centrist normality in this management of the so-called British economy. What Liez Truss and Kwarteng have done is monumentally disastrous for the Conservatives, and that goes over more than 100 years. This is in such a short time the disaster they have committed. That it will take a lot of work on the part of the Conservatives to convince their so-called main electoral base that they are fit for purpose. Fitness for purpose was denied to the Labour Party for more than, well, what is it now? It is 12 years. And because of the disaster by Liez Truss and Kwarteng, Starmer is looking as the likely next prime minister. It's not an achievement by Starmer. It is a consequence of the criminal incompetence and dishonesty and contempt for the public by Liez Truss. Liez Truss personally is a contemptuous individual. And Kwarteng is, of course, a stooge. Despite the claim made by the usual conservative propaganda sheets and platforms that these two have been very close pals, and also the noting that they were born in the same year. Despite all of that, the disaster ship is, of course, being sunk or taken to the bottom by Liez Truss, and Kwarteng is grinning with his stupidity. Despite all the claimed academic kind of success and records, Kwarteng is proving to be completely useless in real terms about society, about the horrendous criminal negligence by successive governments of the needs of the low income people, people in socially degenerated areas in every respect. I mean, there should not be the kind of poverty and starvation and hunger that afflicts millions of people in Britain. There should not be. Why? Because in the same time, at the same time, successive governments, relevant governments have wasted billions, and in the last, let's say, 60, 70 years, UK governments have wasted trillions in funding the big business or big and rich, making the rich richer. And the richer should not be described as richer. They should be described as criminals. And the time is actually on the evidence, objective evidence. The time has been long overdue for the conservative brand or the Tory brand to be ditched forever. And the fact that Liez Truss had no track record in any way as an intellectual frontrunner in the House of Commons since she got in there. And despite that, the conservative voters voted for her. And the conservative platforms like the Scum, the Daily Mail, the Boris Johnson graph, that they actually did overdrive and did promote her against Rishi Sunak, who was not, we shall not devote any time on Rishi Sunak now, but when it comes to the real truth, Rishi Sunak maybe would have behaved in a different way in terms of the drama and the catastrophic kind of speed. But ideologically, Rishi Sunak is not very different from the ideological bent that Liez Truss actually is twisted by, her whole identity. In any case, the cartoon in the Times today by Peter Brooks is absolutely extraordinary. Regardless of what the general narrative and the general commentary around the Liez Truss disaster is, this is a once in a generation kind of achievement by the cartoonist Peter Brooks. I shall find the cartoon and describe it further in the next 2 minutes, if not in the next 1 minute. Let's see if I can get to the page. Peter Brooks is the, let's say, Times' main cartoonist. On page 33 of the Times, which page is part of the comment section of the Times, the Peter Brooks cartoon, does the camera capture? No, it doesn't. So it only captures in a kind of sideways look. But let's describe it. It's on page 33, and it's a very, very easy and very easy to read heading: The Tale of Jemima Clusterfuck. Now the only letter missing from clusterfuck is of course U, but it is clear that Peter Brooks is calling Liez Truss the Jemima clusterfuck. She is completely fucked up. The economy and the narrative and the fact that she is defiant, even according to the Times' front page today, defiant PM set to curb benefits to fund budget. Now, as Andrew Pierce had said on Wednesday, there is no need to cut benefits. In fact, benefits should be brought to the living level of income by scrapping the things like HS2. Andrew Pierce did say that people are not traveling as they might be doing or as they did before. And I'm saying that the hype for HS2, of course, is similar. I mean, using similar lies that the plotters did use to promote Crossrail. And the plot for digging a hole in Brick Lane that the KhoodeelaarTV campaign came into being to stop. That plot was stopped. We stopped it. We did stop it. And we did stop it because single-handedly our campaign focused on the facts. And here are the actual facts that we focused on. First of all, technologically, in terms of engineering, let's say in terms of engineering, that hole in Brick Lane was not necessary for the successful tunnel. I mean, in technological term, successful construction of the tunnel, deep tunnel in the area for the Crossrail line. That was number one. Number two is that it became very clear, and we lost no time in making public that fact, that the actual choice or the targeting of Brick Lane for the digging of that hole, Crossrail hole, was not a result of engineering technical discussion. It was a direct result of Ken lying still Livingston. Ken lying still Livingston taking, in effect, a few £1,000s as a bribe from a man called Gerard Ronson, one of the Guinness 3 City of London crooks that went to jail for a short period, much shorter period than they should have been jailed for a fraud and scam, etc., that they committed. Now, Ronson wanted a free space in the Bishopsgate area for construction of a high tower, tall tower, for his business. And Ken Livingston Livingstone was given, according to one report in the Sunday Times, £10,000 or £12,000. I'm not looking at that particular archived item because that was done, before the 2008 election, I think. The 2008 London mayor election. So this is 2022. So it's quite a number of years ago that this happened. But the fact that this happened was very significant because Ken lying still Livingstone, one of the most overly self-promoted left-wing socialist Labour politicians, was receiving this money from a completely unprincipled, convicted fraudster with the highly toxic conservative sympathies. I mean, how bad can things go? So we didn't have to go and explain every single thing. The fact that Livingstone took the money from a City of London briber for the Heron Tower. Heron Tower has been changed. The name has been changed since the tower was constructed, and it was treated to several additional twisting and refurbishments, etc., etc. This is what capitalists do. They don't create, they don't add natural grace and natural power or strength or sustenance or sustainability to the resources of the world. They rob, they loot, and they twist and they recycle in the worst possible way, not in the positive, natural way, but recycle in the most greedy way. So we discredited Ken lying still Livingstone. We discredited the original plot that was nothing to do with Ken lying still Livingstone, but the bigger interests who have always wanted to destroy the community identity of Brick Lane that had developed over the last 100 years. And the community identity of Brick Lane is very, very significant for me, quite apart from the later things like Crossrail. I grew up in the village where I was born in Silot with the knowledge that members of our extended family, relations or extended family, had settled in London. And where they settled is in the Brick Lane area. They had settled in the 1920s, 1930s. And although I was born a bit later, I grew up in the knowledge that I had relations settled in London, and the place that they had settled was in the Brick Lane area. Now, that is not insignificant because one of those relations who was kind of, in terms of the ranking, he's like a cousin. Well, he is a cousin of my grandmother. He's a cousin of my other grandmother as well, and he's a kind of uncle to both my parents. And his name was Haji Nisar Ali. And he had his own cousin, another cousin, living with him or along with him in the east end of London. Now, Haji Nisar Ali from Sundarpur was one of the main organizers of the community that built up, that was growing up in the east end of London, even in the 30s and the 40s, before the British left the subcontinent in 47, in August 47. And Haji Nisar Ali, on the one hand, from our side of the area in Silot, and he had a friend who was the uncle and also the father-in-law of a travel agent called Tayyib Rahman. So these two were among the people that actually helped other arrivals who settled in the Brick Lane area. Not necessarily in Brick Lane itself, but in Brick Lane area, in the Brick Lane area vicinity. And these are people that created the example of helping other arrivals with their own income and their own resources, not depending on anything to do with the state. And in the 1930s, 40s, there was absolutely no evidence of any support like the crook Ken Lyings to Livingston and others made available by way of fund, corrupting council funds to the crooks that later surfaced in Brickland, and I'll come to that shortly. So Hazini Nisar Ali was one of the leading helpers of the community, the Siloti-speaking community that settled in the East End of London, and mainly around Brick Lane, in and around Brick Lane. So I grew up with the knowledge, although I didn't have any direct kind of contact with him or any of the others, but I grew up with the knowledge of knowing a lot about a foreign destination, a foreign location, which was very much part of the empire that was just about to end or did end. So, in terms of my consciousness, awareness about the world, and my relationships, Brick Lane predated my arrival myself in East London by a few decades. And I became, even before I arrived in the Brick Lane area, I became a natural, an ordinary local Brick Lane person, because quite apart from himself, Nisar Ali, he had nephew and others. One of his nephews had a restaurant, a cafe in Brick Lane, which was situated in the corner of Hanbury Street and Brick Lane. In fact, it was exact location where Azmal Hussain has now his surviving restaurant, because Azmal Hussain gave up the use of the property to the left of Hanbury Street and has been focusing on the property to the right of Hanbury Street in Brick Lane. Azmal Hussain is the one that got listed in the campaign as one of the 4 petitioners against Lutfur Rahman, based on Lutfur Rahman's corruption and fraudulent abuse of the voters, etc., etc. We have discussed Azmal Hussain before, and we shall discuss him later, but this is the geographic description of my relationship with Brick Lane. Let's say again, my relationship with the Brick Lane dates back to the 1920s, even before I was born, but it dates back to the 1920s, crosses the 1930s, 1940s, because of my family relations, including especially Hazini Nisar Ali, who was the leader, one of 2 leaders really, of the Siloti community that was settling around Brick Lane in the 1930s, 40s. And so I became a natural Brick Lane supporter way before I physically came to the area. So that was 50, 60 years before that. So when in December 2003, I received information from K. Jordan that Brick Lane was going to be attacked by a hole that was part of the Crossrail tunnel. And again, this information K. Jordan gave me in December 2003 when I was walking to Bishopsgate to see her off, because as she took the bus to our home in Kentish Town in Camden from Brick Lane area. And we walked along the side road near where the Heron Tower was going to be built later. It was not in that conversation that K. Jordan told me about the Heron Tower. The Heron Tower connection and the Gerald Ronson connection was established by later research and investigation by me, and the technical research by K. Jordan with her skills as an architect and her resources and sources as an architect. So when this happened, when this information reached me in December 2003, right there, physically, almost on the spot where the criminal Ronson had plotted to build his Heron Tower, my reaction or response was quite clear that we had to stop it. And so therefore the investigations began. And one of the things that the investigation revealed or unearthed in December 2003 and onwards, with myself dedicating all my skills and energies and whatever other abilities I had to stopping the Crossrail hole. The revelation included the fact that Private Liez' favorite Tower Hamlets, quote, politician or politico, Abbas alias Halal, had been involved. To what extent or to how directly he was involved in receiving or touting to receive money from the Crossrail is not available in a documentary form. But there had been words that Crossrail, the promoters, had paid a number of individuals that they considered capable of influencing people in Brick Lane, the Bangladeshi community in Brick Lane. And of the names, Abbas alias Halal was one. As the Private Lie edition, which ran the Rotten Borough's column item headed or starting with the heading or starting with the words Halal Dead Meat, in the 16th of October 2010 edition of Private Lie, the Housing Corporation investigating electoral fraud committed in the Spitalfields Housing Association, which since has been changed into all kinds of other things. A list of dead members of the Spitalfields Housing Association, dead meaning clinically dead, had their names still on the list. And at the relevant election for the management committee of the Spitalfields Housing Association, a number of the dead votes were, quote, cast for candidate called A. Candidate A has never confessed in public, but he was asked as many as 4 questions, or 4 times he was asked the question whether candidate A was him. A for Abbas. A for abysmal. Well, that is not what the Private Lie said, Abbas or abysmal, but they said that Abbas lost the power of speech when he was asked on 4 separate occasions the question, was he that candidate A? So you see, the role that Nisar Ali played in the 1940s, 50s, and the role that I continue to play has been morally on the side of upholding the principles of social and community solidarity. And the role that Tower Hamlets Council, as the local council, was caught playing was the immoral, corrupt, and corrupting role. It was widely alleged, not in the Private Lie, but that was only an item among many in circulation. We, the Khoodeelaar campaign, made all the news available, all the information available through our bulletin, the Khoodeelaar campaign bulletin, published every day and printed every day and distributed in Brick Lane and displayed every day on the windows and inside the shop of Turon Mia's video shop in Hanbury Street. Now, Turon Mia, being based in Hanbury Street and running the video shop, was, of course, a genuine kind of objector to the proposed Crossrail hole. So we, the Khoodeelaar campaign, converted Turon Mia's shop as the de facto campaign headquarters, where we would discuss plans and we would update things, and which was targeted by the Tower Hamlets councillors, mainly the Tower Hamlets councillors that had Bangladeshi backgrounds. Or either they had been born in Bangladesh or they had Bangladeshi connections. Their targeting meant that every evening, sometimes during the day, but mainly in the evening, late evenings, they would find any excuse or pretext to visit the shop and greet Turon Mia with a kind of respect and deference that they did not usually show to one another, let alone to Turon Mia. But these councillors, including Dorasullah, who was one time civic mayor, Dorasullah spoke to me a number of times in Brick Lane, and the few times that he did come very close to where I was standing, I could detect the smell of alcohol floating around him. Now, I'm a teetotaler. The only time that I drank any alcohol was by accident, complete, utter accident, and reluctantly under kind of one-time pressure from sources that I will not name here. So Dorasullah would greet me with wide smile, as if, like Bibi Chaudhry, the GP, I shall come to Bibi Chaudhry, the GP, who greeted me from behind after 11 o'clock at night in Cannon Street Road and claimed that he had been looking for me. And I answered by saying that you are a liar. How could you be looking for me in Cannon Street Road at 11 o'clock at night? You live in Leytonstone, and this is Cannon Street Road. You liar. Why do you say that? Because you don't often said that you were looking for me in a friendly way. And that was because Bibi Chaudhry, who is now deceased, was under investigation, serious investigation by the GP's regulatory body. And he had tried licensed law trading barristers, soul cheaters, etc., and had paid thousands of pounds, etc., etc. But he had been told that he had no chance of survival. Note this. So why did Bibi Chaudhry make this false claim and say that he was looking for me? I was not on the list as a licensed law trader, and I was not advertising any service anywhere. Answer is that this is what I do and I did, and the likes of Bibi Chaudhry knew that I did that. I'm the miracle person that solved the most difficult issues, litigation issues and legal issues that others cannot even begin to comprehend, let alone solve. So it was agreed that Bibi Chaudhry and I would sit in a cafe, not that evening, but on a day not long after he bumped into me. He actually made that false claim to begin with. So I got hold of his information, all the documents that, or documentary information that he provided about the General Medical Council. The result was that I produced what I alone produce. I produce an indictment of the GMC, and essentially, as a result of my indictment of the GMC, they left Bibi Chaudhry alone. Now, Bibi Chaudhry lived to practice as a GP for many years after that. Now, this is one example, and this I didn't get Bibi Chaudhry. He didn't pay me anything. And if it came to paying, he could not possibly pay me anything. Why? Because it was like saving him, literally saving him from certain professional death, and probably a death caused by coronary failures resulting from the pressure. Now, Bibi Chaudhry otherwise was a very influential Bengali, literally worshipped by thousands of Siloti speaking people in the east end of London who were registered with his practice mainly for the reason that he gave false prescription in the main. False in the sense that he was a service for abusing the GP kind of practice to issue, let's say, papers under the cover of being a general practitioner that were mainly held kind of used or were useful for these people in sorting out parts of their claims on immigration, on their claims on getting benefits, on their claims on being unwell and sick. Bibi Chaudhry, I would say, would easily rank in the history as one of the most corrupt practitioners as GP who discredited the GP's role to a point where the DWP and other government departments were forced to delegitimize GP's letters and prescriptions for benefit claimants. I make these exclusive, absolutely exclusive, thoroughly factual assertions. But Bibi Chaudhry, quite apart from being a corrupt practitioner, was also a non-corrupt kind of source of so much information about so many events that were going on around his practice, let's say. For example, a notorious beater of his girlfriend. The girlfriend would call Bibi Chaudhry's practice in the middle of the night in hysterics and cry and weep and scream for help. Given that Bibi Chaudhry lived in Leytonstone and this woman who was being beaten up by this drunken thug was in Stepney, it was a considerable journey. And Bibi Chaudhry used the services of an Indian girl as his driver and chauffeur. And it is said also as his mistress on the side. Although Bibi Chaudhry himself was married to a woman from Sindh, a Sindhi Hindu woman, whom he met while he was in the Pakistan army as a doctor, as a kind of non-combating member of the army. Now, Bibi Chaudhry also features in the updating commentary about Council of Citizens of Tar Hamlets, where the author of that little pamphlet, a historic little pamphlet, Police Nigger Hunt in Notting Hill, man called Joe Hunt. Joe Hunt was a physically significant, towering body. But by the time he was deposited, let's say, as the main official at the Council of Citizens of Tar Hamlets, Joe Hunt had lost the use of his brains, and he most certainly had no social solidarity with the people in Tower Hamlets. So he was one of the parasites that discredited the whole race relations industry, as they say, because Joe Hunt was getting the money, which was significant compared to the average person in Brick Lane area or in Tower Hamlets. He was getting guaranteed money. On top of that, he was being serviced by Bibi Chaudhry's wife, the Sindhi woman, by her bringing lots of milk and feeding Bibi Chaudhry during the day. That was her job as a member of the staff of the Council of Citizens of Tar Hamlets. This was an abuse that Joe Hunt happily indulged in. There were several staff in that outfit. Joe Hunt, followed by Khalilur Rahman, followed by, well, there was another one who was not in post at the time for long. By the time I met Bibi Chaudhry, he's called a crook called Abu Buya. So Abu Buya, Khalilur Rahman, and then the Bengali midget Ali Asghar, and of course Bibi Chaudhry's wife, and then another man whose name I forget, but it will come to me, and another one, he's of Maltese origin. So there were about 5 or 6 people on full-time salary being paid money public money under the banner of the Council of Citizens of Tower Hamlets. So I met Bibi Chaudhry not long after I met Joe Hunt. So in 1973, so from 1973 up to when, for a good 10, 11, 12 years, this went on. And the battle that I had against the resistance by Joe Hunt and the others, resistance to any program of campaign against racism, racist discrimination, any program for the launching of a systematic monitoring of the discrimination that was being practiced across Tower Hamlets, that battle is one of the many unique battles that I have been fighting. And fighting despite the fact that I never have applied for any state funding, nor have I expected any state funding, nor would I receive any state funding, even if offered, because it would contaminate. If I were to receive any state funding, my work would be contaminated completely. And all the moral and ethical foundational character of my work would be tarnished. So whatever I did, I have done in that context, in that particular 10, 12 years with Joe Hunt and his cabal. I did with my own resources whatever I could create and find. And with the help of my mother. My mother gave me the help, not because of the politics as such, because my mother treated me as her son who needed support. That is as simple as that. There was not a lot of complication in there. And implicitly and instinctively, my mother believed in my work in defending the values and the principles. These all go back to my great-grandfather, the saint, Badshah, Shah Abdul Ali. And my grandmother, my father's mother, said that I was the continuation of my great-grandfather, which I am and which I have been. Now, it was not something that the likes of Joe Hunt could understand. Most certainly not Bibi Chaudhry. Because Bibi Chaudhry, I rescued him from certain multiple deaths, if you like, career deaths and physical deaths, because of the weight of evidence that existed against him and had been submitted to and been available to the General Medical Council. Because I knew that Bibi Chaudhry would visit people at the middle of the night and he would charge. What he would charge would be a fraction of the money or the monetary gain that these people he was giving certificates to would receive as a result of their being able to use his scribbled so-called prescriptions to further their own benefits, if you like. So I was located for 20 years, if you like, in an area right in the center of Bibi Chaudhry's illicit side of the operations. Now, why am I calling Bibi Chaudhry illicit? Because after after he was let off by the General Medical Council, resulting from my intervention, he began to brag and boast, because these people are the main population in the Brick Lane area, the Bangladeshi population in the Brick Lane area, that Bibi Chaudhry used as his field, were Silotis. And he was a Bengali. He was not even a Bengali, he was from Chittagong. But quite apart from where he was from, it turned out later that Bibi Chaudhry was a believer of what I now know, or I have since known, in a significantly different way, as the ideology of the Hinduttas that the Indian B- Janata, sorry, the BJP alliance fronted by Narendra Modi is running. Because Bibi Chandra was speaking to me about 2 years after I had rescued him. So that was in the 1990s. So he was feeling very confident as he boasted to me sitting in his car in a street called Abafeldi Road, not far from the Crisp Street Market in the Blackwall Tunnel area, which is not far from the Mulberry Place HQ of the Towners Council. It wasn't there, but in the Aberfeldy Street, we were traveling. Bibi Chaudhry and I were traveling from some kind of event. And Bibi Chaudhry was stuck there for traffic or whatever. And he was driving. Of course, I don't believe in driving. And he felt that he could easily boast to me along the lines, not quoting him. Bibi Chaudhry said that Bangladesh as a country, as an entity, was a joke, that it belonged to India. He said that the Bangladeshis don't own their country. He said it belongs to India. And he also said, as a Hindu, he also boasted that most of the Muslim patients or people who are his clients that call him, he said that it is his words. He said, Bibi Chaudhry, a Hindu, said that these Muslims treated him as their God. I mean, this was the same vein that he was saying that Bangladesh didn't exist and that Bangladesh didn't belong to the Bangladeshis and the Bangladeshis didn't own their own country. And that he said that most of his clients, the Siloti clients in Tower Hamlets and in the neighboring areas, treated him as their God. Why? Because he was delivering to them benefits that only God could give them, like getting out of a tussle with the Home Office or getting some benefits from the DWP or whatever it was called. Now, I observed these boasts from Bibi Chaudhry in the historic context, and I knew that he was absolutely telling the truth of his feelings. Not the truth about the Bangladeshis, but the truth about his feelings. Now, I have, and I still have, the dilemma. How do I tell the collectively or individually in some cases, those Bangladeshis about whom he was making those boasts? How do I convince them that that is what Bibi Chaudhry is like? That his attitude towards the Bangladeshis, towards the Muslims, was one of contempt, one of real, very low opinion about the Bangladeshis. When he was the alleged victim of an attack in the Brick Lane area, and he was allegedly hospitalized in the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. His photographs showing him apparently injured state. His photographs were the lead item in all the ethnicity-linked, Bangladeshi-linked so-called newspapers or outlets published or circulated from addresses in Tower Hamlets in the name of the Bangladeshis, the Silotis. I never found out anything about the truth about who attacked Bibi Chaudhry, if there was an attack. What I did hear from him was at least 5 or 6 different versions of his attackers. Either he said that it was the people from the East London Mosque that had organized the attack on him, or that these were people connected with the Bangladesh High Commission in London, or that they were connected with a number of named Bangladeshi individuals in the Brick Lane area. So the attack couldn't have been as kind of reliable or authentic as a single narrative that had been run in the servile and dishonest Bangla language outlets, because their agenda was nothing to do with the Brick Lane area or the Bangladeshi community. These outlets have been running as agents, political agents of the mental slaves in control of the propaganda about Bangladesh in Bangladesh and through them in the UK. They are absolutely loyal to the idea that the Bangladesh actually belongs to the Hindutva agenda leadership. Think about that. So this was the line that was underlying the promotion of Bibi Chaudhry. The archive pictures will show that Bibi Chaudhry was shown as a really almost kind of at the door of death due to the attack. Bibi Chaudhry never got anyone arrested for the alleged attack. So when I asked him, did he report it to the police? Bibi Chaudhry was very vague. Now, anyone who would have been attacked in the way that Bibi Chaudhry had been depicted in the ethnicity-linked papers had been attacked, would have been one of the things they would have done would have been to call the police. Bibi Chaudhry, to my knowledge so far, did not either report this to the police, and if he did, no prosecution followed. No one was arrested, which is staggering. Because in the Bangla language promotions for Bibi Chaudhry over that so-called attack, to outsiders, to people who don't know the details about the community, about the history, about Brick Lane, about Chittagong, about the role of the Hindus in the 1930s, leading up to the various so-called riots between Hindus and Muslims before the British left. This would be a clear-cut case of a very responsible GP being attacked by miscreants. My questioning of Bibi Chaudhry took place in Brick Lane at 108 Brick Lane, because Bibi Chaudhry insisted on visiting 108 Brick Lane, which is where Abdul Salik was doing his little sweet shop at that stage. And Bibi Chaudhry and Abdul Salik had a short argument. And the argument concerned, at that stage, Abdul Salik's completely dishonest and discreditable claim about knowing the so-called leaders of the student movement of the 1960s in Bangladesh. Abdul Salik never knew anyone genuinely who was in politics. Abdul Salik was not significant in anything. And Bibi Chaudhry condemned Abdul Salik's audacity. And Abdul Salik retaliated by condemning Bibi Chaudhry as well. So I'm not saying any of the things based on a motivation against Bibi Chaudhry, but I'm factually reporting everything that happened. Now, Bibi Chaudhry was not a member of the ordinary Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets. He used this as the field to exploit. And his wife was not either engaged in social work or community work or work against the racist discrimination. His wife was deployed at the CCTH as part of a deal with Joe Hunt. Joe Hunt was a corrupt individual by the time that he was given that deposit, because he was deposited, as I say. An incident happened in February 1984, where a meeting was taking place of the CCTH, and I was attending the meeting just as an ordinary member of the organization at that stage. And at that meeting, something unprecedented happened. A stranger arrived at the meeting, and the stranger wanted to be allowed to speak. It was a woman of mixed, I think, is Jamaican origin. And the woman was in tears as she described her being treated as a thief by an Indian origin postmaster in the Limehouse area. I think she was arrested by the Limehouse branch of the Metropolitan Police, and she was taken into custody, and she was, I think, detained at the Limehouse police station. The incident that was concerned with the arrest was that she went to a post office in the area. Now, she was a teacher at the St. Paul's School, St. Paul's Way School in the Badetro area, not far from the Limehouse. So this woman was absolutely in hysterics, and she was crying. She was crying, and she was crying, and she was crying. And the length of the time that she spoke, I can't remember the amount, actual length of time she spoke for. But it was very clear that she was very upset at being called a thief and treated as a thief and being arrested by the Metropolitan Police on suspicion as a thief. This was, the allegation was that she somehow abused or stolen somebody's child benefit. It was her child benefit that she went to cash at the post office. As I never had that experience, so I don't know the actual procedure, but she did go to the post office, and she was quizzed by the postmaster, whom she described as an Indian, and the postmaster then ignored her protests. She protested to the effect that she was genuine and she didn't steal the child benefit book or whatever the allegations were. But the postmaster called the police anyway. And then she was arrested. And between the St. Paul's Way School and the Limehouse police station, it's not very far. So she was taken into custody by the Metropolitan Police, who detained her at the Limehouse police station. So this was the description, but it was given in a person. Of course, she was the person that was affected. So this description was given in a personal, emotional, very passionate way. Now, I didn't know this person. I had no reason to know this person. And I had not been made aware of her presence, or even if she were physically visible before the meeting proper started, I wouldn't have any idea as to who she was. So after she finished, I moved a motion at the meeting, saying words to the effect that we should support this person and we should do whatever was lawfully necessary and possible to help her. That was in February 1984. So this is what? 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96. God, it's a long time, isn't it? It's 38 years, isn't it? So 38 years ago, this individual teacher at the St. Paul's Way School was arrested on suspicion of stealing a child benefit book or claim. And I took the initiative as a member of the CCTH, where Joe Hunt was still the main official in post. And it was agreed. There was no way that it could not be agreed. Because even that woman would agree that my speech in her support were very persuasive. In the phone call that followed, a few hours later, this woman said that she was impressed by my performance. Whether this woman is capable of remembering any of that is another matter, but that is what I remember. The woman was living in an area in Lambeth. And Joe Hunt didn't have to do anything. He never did anything. But what I did afterwards, not necessarily as a member of the CCTH, but as a campaigner, as the campaigner, effectively took the burden, the pressure off from that woman, the humiliation and the disgrace and the pain, personal pain that she suffered. This is 38 years ago, isn't it? I shall check the calendar and look at the actual number of years. How many similar targets of racially linked prejudice and action have been helped By how many others? Because this actually brings back into focus what Rupa Haque has said about Kwasi Kwarteng, that he doesn't come across or doesn't sound as a genuine black person when he's on the BBC Radio 4 Today program. He sounds like a superficially black person. I remember various acts that I have done that, say, at that time it was a QC, but now he would be a KC, wouldn't he? A conservative MP who appeared as the main kind of advocate in a court in a defamation action. He was paid, I think, let's say, between £15,000 to £30,000. It could be different. I don't want to be precise because I don't have any documentary evidence in front of me. Now, that defamation action was a successful action by this man, Edward Garnier, on behalf of his particular client. But that defamation action would never have existed without my work. The quality of my work is unique, has been unique in every case. So if he got any payment, he got without having to haggle. And he would have been the recipient of much more than just the cash. Because it is known that mental slaves and ethnic surrogates are extraordinarily generous in showing their gratitude and appreciation to the likes of, say, another white member of the establishment or left establishment, Tony Gifford. As I said, if I charged anyone same rate as David Pennick did, the Manchester Football Club, at the rate of £20,000 per day, then I would have made by now, in the last 5 decades in this country, let's say, I would have made a few billion pounds based on the quality of my work, not based on my name. For example, one family that approached Turan Mia in Brick Lane in Hanbury Street. Well, the husband of the family, let's say. And in desperation, this individual said how he could get hold of Mr. Haque. And Turan Mia said, why? And this individual said that I and my wife are going to jail. And we have children and we have absolutely nowhere else to go in terms of getting help. So Turan Mia said words to the effect, why don't you go to a solicitor or a barrister? And this individual, in the conversation that I did not witness, said words to the effect that they are no good. There is no barrister or solicitor that can do what Mr. Haque can do, which was absolutely correct. Now, this individual with his wife had been arrested by Tower Hamlets Council after they were caught letting a property in the Limehouse area, the property that they were given to live in by the council, because they said they were homeless and they had children. What they didn't tell the council was that they were probably technically capable of being called homeless, but they had their own home, in the sense that they had already been living in a place with several rooms in one house in the Cannon Street Road area, which is 5 minutes walk from New Road, my home. So this individual had then never lived in that council property that the council gave, or the property that the council paid for. They let the property to one or two Eastern European individuals. And what they did was that these Eastern European individuals, first of all, they didn't have the legal right to enter this country or live in this country at the time. Whatever their status was, prevented them from kind of arguing or haggling or bargaining for the or arguing, well, negotiating a reasonable price. They were prepared to pay quite high sums of money as rent. It was thousands of pounds. And the Tower Hamlets Council must have found out somehow. And the where they found out was by accident, because they were doing a routine check of the property as to who was living there. And when they found that these persons in whose name these property or properties, it was one or two properties, weren't there, they quizzed the persons that they found on the property. As a result of that information, they made an early morning raid and arrested the individual and his wife at the property in the Cannon Street Road area. So Turan Mia said to this individual that you are asking for Mr. Haque's help, but after he helped you, you won't remember it. And this individual was in such a state that he wept and he wept and he wept, and he was kind of wiping his tears away to convince Turun Mia that he would not betray Mr. Haque in that way. I didn't know about any of this conversation, but this is what did happen. So Turun Mia briefly told me later that so-and-so had come and sought help from Mr. Haque. The short account I can put here is that I did agree, and the police left them alone, this family. No prosecution, no going to jail, no destruction of the children or their lives. When was that? That was much later than 1984. That was during this century. This was either during this century or the late 1990s. So what happened? After I got them off and stopped the council prosecuting them, This individual had the same loss of power of speech that the private eye item in the Rotten Boroughs column, which had the piece Halal Dead Meat in its 16th of October 2010 edition. Like that, this individual who got off because of my intervention lost all power of memory and recollection. Now, this is only two cases. Over the years, I've been doing cases and cases and cases. Now, this one would not have been possible to get them out of jail even if they spent £100,000. But this individual has claimed to have been a member of a traditionally enterprising family of restaurant business owners in the Brooklyn area. So, when our campaign, that is the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, was targeted by the Terms Council because of the opposition to Council's role that we have been representing. It happened one day that I asked this individual to make a contribution to cover part of the cost of the paperwork that we needed. So I was sitting in the back of his car and he was in the driver's seat. What he did was, like he did with the left hand, he gave me a £10 note in the left hand in the most contemptuous way. Now this boy belongs in prison. This boy belongs in prison, as does his wife. He is not in prison, but he does belong in prison. I am the one who has kept him out of prison and given him a life and given his entire family life. How dare this criminal give me this £10 note like that? One session with David Penick would cost them £20,000. And they would touch David Penick's feet and they would be forever grateful to David Penick. What is it about me that makes them think that I come at a different rate or no rate at all? While I deliver unthinkable rescue operations, rescue results. I'm saying this on the record. So this boy, who is not biologically, chronologically a boy, but to me, he will forever remain a boy, ungrateful boy. He belongs in jail. And for the contemptuous behavior, he needs to serve another extra rest of his life in prison for his ingratitude. How dare he give me the £10 notes? If he sold his restaurant business and gave the proceeds to me in full, he would still not be compensating me even a fraction of the amount that he owes me. And I didn't never owe him anything. As I never owed that woman who came crying from the St. Paul's Way School to the Tower Hamlets CCTH in Hanbury Street. Around that time, after that woman became familiar with Tower Hamlets as a community, I introduced that woman to a crook. Well, I didn't introduce her as a crook face to face, but I told her about the crook that was going to be a crook, but not known as a crook at that time. But I predicted that criminal crook, an ethnicity-linked prostitute, was being prepared by the racists in Tower Hamlets to do serious damage to the community. This prostitute, criminal fraudster, is known as Baroness Paula Monzila-Uddin. Now, this woman from Lambeth, that I described this Monzila-Uddin at the time too, I don't think she believed the accuracy of my prediction. But I have been more than thoroughly vindicated about Paula Monzila, the disgrace. There are a number of Bangladeshis, Siloti origin Bangladesh. This Paula Monzila-Uddin is not from the Sileti background. She is from a Bengali background. I have no idea how she ended up in Tower Hamlets and exploiting the Silotis. There are at least 4 or 5 that I know, the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshis, that refer to this criminal Paula Monzila-Uddin as Fola Apa, meaning sister, this elder sister. And they still do that despite the fact that she is forever going to be known as the thief that stole the public money while she was allegedly, supposedly, claiming the expenses as a member of the House of Peers. Now, the housing association that actually was used by Paula Monzila-Uddin was the one that was set up in the late 1980s, which began kind of receiving main funding from the GLC at the beginning of the 1990s. Is called the Spitalfields Housing Cooperative. The Spitalfields Housing Cooperative had the background in the context. The background was that in the kind of critical days of the late 1970s, when many of the Bangladeshis brought their families, wives and children, or just wives, from Silot to London, there was a housing shortage in terms of publicly available housing stock. And there was this serious challenge. Those who brought their families and their relations to decently house these new arrivals. That was one side. And the other thing was the actual ramification or the implication or the impact of the campaign that we began. Well, when I say we, I collectively refer to the community, but it has never been the case at any stage in the last 5 decades here or in the decades that I had been campaigning back in East Pakistan before, Nobody actually stays committed to the campaign that they start alongside with me. I remain the one holding the banner as well as the spanner. And I have the moral obligation to take it to the logical conclusion. So, what happened with the murder of Al-Tabali, that a lot of the rhetoric that was generated as a result of the murder and the rhetoric against racism, a lot of the rhetoric was hijacked. Now, I said this on the record. Any criminal crook boy who makes claims contrary to what I say about their role is hereby reminded of the legal and moral obligation to challenge me in a court of law. And I say it in Siloti. বেইমানৰ ফুয়াইন বেইমানি মাতিওনার বেইমান ফুয়াইন কুনগুর সাহস নাই তোমরা কুনগুর সাহস নাই বেইমানের ফুয়াইন বেইমান ফুয়াইন সুর ফুয়াইন আমার খামরে চুরি করিয়া তোমরা লাখ লাখ পাউন্ড চুরি করিয়া ফাইতরা গ্রান টান রাইতান রে বেইমান ফুয়াইন শরম লাগে না নি I said this in the spirit of the universal principles that Imran Khan has been enunciating since May 2022, when he was the subject of a conspiracy by foreign government, including the USA and others, and he was deposed. Imran Khan has been saying in Urdu, chur, chur. And we have been saying about, well, me and the others who follow me, if you like, in terms of the rhetoric and the slogan. When the first solution, crooks, robbed the Bangladeshi ordinary migrants money, and now former councillor called Shahed Ali organized a cultural business event somewhere near the Tower of London. And he invited this crook, fraudster criminal, the owner of Channel Slave, Mahi Ferdaus Jalil. This thief boy stole somebody's name, Ferdaus. It is not his parents' gift that they gave him. His parents were not intellectually, culturally, morally capable of finding that name in the nomenclature that he could actually draw from. So Mahi Ferdaus Jalil was invited by Shahed Ali, the entrepreneur, to appear as a guest on the platform or the stage where some Bangladeshi professional artists had been kind of brought by Shahed Ali to perform. And as I said before in an earlier edition, as soon as Mahi Ferdaus Jalil appeared, people started saying, Sur, Sur, Sur. Unlike Imran Khan's Urdu pronunciation, the Siloti pronunciation is different accent. Not chor, chor, chor. It's Sur, Sur, Sur. And the other thing is that some of the people calling him a thief, Sur is thief, were throwing their shoes. Now, as people familiar with the history of the end of the occupation of Iraq by G.W. Bush may recall from the footage that they may have seen, throwing a shoe at anybody is historically a very much powerful symbol of political and social rejection in the whole of the Asian continent, I think. So Bush was thrown a shoe. A shoe was thrown in the direction of Bush somewhere during his trip. And that became very important item in the day's news. So when Mahi Ferdaus Jalil, the thief, was called a thief and shoes were thrown in his direction, the now former councillor, Shahid Ali, was forced to approach Mahi Ferdaus and whisper into his corrupt ears something. Whatever he whispered convinced Mahi Ferdaus Jalil to agree to walk away from that stage, which he did. And in the kind of depth of the archives on the internet, that walk still exists. And so whenever he appears as the presenter of the reality with Mahi, he never can produce reality with Mahi. It is always fantasy, criminal fantasy that is not far from the achievements of Satan, Iblis. Satan, the angel, the main angel in paradise, was commanded by God to bow to human beings. This is the narrative from the Holy Quran, the Surah Al-Isra. But there are other references to this in the Islamic narratives and Islamic commentaries. So God asked Satan, Iblis, to bow to the human beings, and the Satan said, I was created originally from fire and they are created from clay. I'm not going to bow to them. And God said that he must, and Satan repeated that he would not. So there was this end to this particular exchange between God and Satan, with God saying that Satan had the option to try his worst to mislead human beings by misleading them from the good to the evil. But God expressed confidence that most people loyal to himself, that is God, would follow God and shun Satan. Now, all this reality with Mahi is full of satanic delusions, because God said to Satan that you can delude as many as you can. So Mahi Ferdaus Jalil is a deluder in the fashion of Satan. As I said previously, in January 2006, the Khoodeelaar campaign did a number of extraordinary interventions, which were all successful, because we rescued the career of George Galloway from being discontinued, terminated by Tony Blair. Such is the moral, ethical power of the Khoodeelaar campaign that Tony Blair and his local stooges disappeared when we organized the mobilization against Tony Blair. But then George Galloway disappeared from the moral political scene as well, because he ended up as a surrogate, as a succor to Nigel Nasty Farage. And Peterborough, when the Peterborough by-election took place, with a woman of African origin, an MP being replaced, there was an election, by-election, and at that by-election, this George Galloway begged Nigel Nasty Farage to let him, that is George Galloway, stand as a candidate for the Nigel Nasty Farage party. And even Nigel Nasty the crook Farage said fuck off to George Galloway. Now, George Galloway must remember, if he is listening, watching this, or if any of his cronies, associates watching this, that I have never needed to tell a lie. And I'm telling him that he was ungrateful to the community in Tower Hamlets. He was an ingrate. That how dare he go to Nigel Nasty Farage and support Nigel Nasty Farage in his adventure about Brexit and all the other rubbish. George Galloway never existed as an independent, really independent politician with any principles. That program by Newsnight, BBC Newsnight, which was a documentary devoted to George Galloway's career up to that time, George Galloway has never sued the BBC. Why am I saying that? Because George Galloway enriched himself by suing the Daily Telegraph. Because the Daily Telegraph published a claim that George Galloway had received money from Saddam Hussein or from kind of the Iraqi sources, etc., etc. That was based on allegedly discarded papers found after the end of the kind of Iraqi government's hold at the beginning of the war, 2001, etc. So George Galloway craftily concocted a libel claim against the Daily Telegraph. Now, Galloway is, of course, hugely, heavily morally compromised, has always been. But on this technicality, he was advised, and it appears he was advised craftily, correctly. He had the points against the Telegraph, which is what convinced the court, whatever court that he applied to, it was Queen's Bench Division, is the normal platform for libel actions. And the Queen's Bench Division, or whoever actually gave the order, and ordered the Telegraph to pay George Galloway significant amount of money. I cannot mention the exact amount because I'm not looking at the actual documents, but that can be checked because this is all on the record. As a result of that particular receipt, George Galloway decided that he would fight Tony Blair's decision to kick him, that is Galloway, out of the Labour Party at that time. And a crafty set of secret meetings happened, which must have included information or advice from Ken Lyons to Livingstone, that the most fertile target to choose would be the East End of London for two reasons. One was that the Bethnal Green and Bow constituency in Tower Hamlets was also the home of a significant number of Bangladeshi Muslim voters, and that constituency was being represented within quotation mark at the time by a woman called Una King. Now, Una King was at that time it was not publicly known, but she was the daughter of a Jewish mother, that is a white Jewish mother, and a black father. More about that black father later. So George Galloway was, again, technically correctly advised to target the East End of London and to replicate that is George Galloway's, notorious Muslim-friendly rhetoric to excite and incite the Muslim voters in Tower Hamlets to hold him as their white rescuer. And I'm saying that for a reason. So the first outing, the first kind of meeting that Galloway organized was in a cinema hall in the Mile End Road, in the basement. I didn't attend, but I had people who attended, and they came and gave me authentic information about what happened. What happened at that event was that a lot of SWB wonkers, socialist wonkers, and their ilk were there. So it was mainly white left-wing wonkers staging a thing physically within the area of Bethnal Green and Bow, also familiar and associated with a lot of Muslim voters. But there was not a single Muslim or Bangladeshi speaker there. And George Galloway has never, ever understood the depth of his crass racism. Whenever he appeared on top of a bus or top of a kind of vehicle, surrounded by a lot of Muslims, and raising his hand as the only white one in the whole of the British Isles, he came across as totally racist, and his Muslims came across as totally stupid and mentally servile and beyond any contempt. Galloway was never going to free the Palestinians. Galloway never truly belonged with the Palestinians. Galloway adopted the image of the Palestinians and appropriated or misappropriated their plight by falsely making routine claims and appearances in their proximity. Because if Galloway had done any of those things genuinely as a sympathizer with the Palestinians, he would never, ever go within 100 miles of nasty Nigel anti-Muslim Farage. So Galloway staged that event in the cinema hall, basement in the cinema hall in the Mile End Road, not far from what became a center of meetings, not 100 years or so, yards down the street. not even 100 years. For the Bangladeshi, that is the hall there that is no longer in the same use. So Galloway launched his bid to become a candidate at the 2005 UK general election, a candidate in the Bethnal Green and Bow constituency. And his main tactic was to go to the East London Mosque and a thing called the IFE, a thing according to the Dispatches program, broadcast on Channel 4 on the 1st of March 2010 and fronted by Andrew Gilligan. He went to the IFE and others associated with them. And he must have, of course, had discussions with Ken Livingstone, because Livingstone would have been his ally in the context of Livingstone being opposed to the leadership of the Labour Party by Tony Blair. So eventually, they confected the thing called Respect, and allegedly, on behalf of the Respect outfit, Galloway stood for election at the 2005 election. After the result was announced, the BBC Newsnight, the item being fronted by Jeremy Paxman, had a on-air live debate with George Galloway, in the course of which Jeremy Paxman, notorious racist, challenged George Galloway by quoting Tony Banks. Tony Banks is the bonkers Banks, who used to be the West Ham Labour Party MP. And Banks in the county hall in the 1980s would literally run away if he saw me on the principal floor, so-called, because he actually convinced himself that I was there in county hall to physically confront him. I never had any such intention. My intention is and was and remains constitutional, ethical, evidential, moral, intellectual, and so on. The Tony Bonkers had said, according to Jeremy Paxman, that by defeating Una King, George Galloway had actually defeated a black woman, to which George Galloway technically correctly answered that Una King didn't look black. They should look almost as white as anybody. Anyone who personally has seen Una King from close quarters would agree with George Galloway, because Una King doesn't look black. She looks white in the skin. But of course, she looks the kind of white that is produced by the mixed parentage. Now, Una King, all that time before the election of 1997, had concealed from the public in Britain the fact that her father, a black man, was in fact an American. Now, it appeared with the help of The Guardian that they confected a whole myth about her father post facto, after she got the election, well, after she got the nomination in the name of the Labour Party in 1995. Sorry, for the nomination in 1997 election. And as a result of which she rushed to show her color to the notorious fucker Bill Clinton in the White House. Was it an encounter requited by the two perverts? Is not publicly published. But the point is that Una King, looked at from the close quarters, doesn't come across as a black woman, except, of course, if you want to kind of examine the twists and turns in her hair. So when Jeremy Paxman put that to the George Galloway, who was beside himself with excitement, he was overly excited and he was overly fulfilled, self-congratulating himself, because his language was grotesque. He said to Paxman that Paxman should congratulate him. The liar should have said that Paxman should congratulate the voters of Bethnal Green and Bow for kicking out Una King, because we kicked her out at their polls on the May 2005 election day, based on the boasts that she had made when criticized that she was not supporting the Palestinian people. Una King had said words to the effect, well, that is my policy, that is my record. If you don't like it, get rid of me at the election. And as a constituency community, we took serious note of all of that. And we decided to kick her out, which we did. Now, when I said how we kicked her out, the lying cabal around George Galloway claimed credit. Where are they now? George Galloway is not in Tower Hamlets, nor is any of his lying racist cunts. Those cunts should not be, I mean, even if you used a kind of stretcher, they could not be got out of the one of the restaurants that Azmal Hussain owned in Brick Lane. They seem to be eating in his restaurant forever. So they said that they had actually got rid of Una King. Where are they now? Because at the time of the 2006 council elections, George Galloway and his disrespect stood about 3 or 4, I think, candidates in their own name in Newham, not in Tower Hamlets, in next door Newham. And they had done that by, at that time, denouncing Robin Wales. They had done that by denouncing Robin Wales on various things, especially by trying to incite the Muslims of Newham electorate that Robin Wales was anti-Muslim, etc., etc., etc. They did that. So who did the Muslim voters in Newham vote for at that election in 2006? not George Galloway's disrespect party. That conclusively proved that this was another racist, white leftist cabal trying to exploit the Muslim voters for their little pathetic careers. They got disgracefully small number of votes. They showed that George Galloway didn't belong in Newham, nor did he belong in Tower Hamlets either. But back to Newsnight and that live kind of row between Paxman and Galloway. Galloway said that he was outraged. Well, Galloway said words to the effect that he was outraged that Paxman was not congratulating him, that is Galloway. And we remain outraged. Well, I remain outraged that an ingrate like George Galloway did not thank the people of the constituency for kicking Una King out. Well, Galloway found out at the next election in Tower Hamlets just how completely artificial and baseless he is. He challenged what he called the Battle of the Scots. He challenged this racist Jim Fitzpatrick, who was the MP for Poplar and Limehouse. And Galloway said that he was going to take Jim Fitzpatrick on at the 2010 general election. And he said that at the Battle of the Scots, in the actual event, George Galloway got very significantly, embarrassingly small number of votes, thus showing that in Tower Hamlets, in the other constituency of Tower Hamlets, George Galloway was absolutely treated correctly by the voters who didn't want him. So, to rescue George Galloway from the dustbin into which Tony Blair had flicked him, it was me, my campaign, not once, but throughout his tenure. What he may say in giving credit to his friends at the East London Mosque, he can say it, but he must say on the record, item by item, how they did the significant work and how I didn't. Because on the night of the result of the election of 2010, I was crossing Hanbury Street, literally Hanbury Street, and I was in the middle of Hanbury Street between the two restaurants on either side that at that time owned by Ajmal Hussain. And Ajmal Hussain volunteered to me. I didn't ask his opinion on anything. He greeted me and wanted to make me, I don't know, probably positively kind of pleased about something. So he started to call George Galloway about 20 different names. He was a liar, he was a this, that, and the other. Now, it was the same Ajmal Hussain who had fed George Galloway and his racist cabal, except Carol Swords. I don't include her as a racist cabal, but the others are racist liars that frequented his restaurant and they got the money, well, more than the money's worth, and they were overfed, in fact. And Galloway was praised by Azmal Hussain, who praised the others as well, until the day of the result of the election of 2010, May 2010, when Azmal Hussain was uncontrollably angry and upset with the George Galloway. So you can see, whoever you are, wherever you are, that whatever you read or hear about Tower Hamlets, about George Galloway, is very far from the truth. This is where you can get the truth. And this is where you get the truth, because this is the purpose of our campaign, has been and will remain forever the purpose of the campaign. Truth about not just the racists, but truth about the lots of colluders and suckers in the Bangladeshi community, among the Muslims, and among others. And what we are going to do is to look at the well, I'm looking at it because the camera can't look at it. The cartoon, the Peter Brooks cartoon, on page 33 of the Times of Friday, the 30th of September 2022, that Liez Truss, I call her, has been exposed as telling the tale of Jemima Clusterfuck. When Peter Brooks comes to that, using the fuck, it is time to recognize that the days of this disgraceful clusterfucking, lying, Liez Truss, politically, the days are numbered. We shall continue with all the other outstanding issues that remain out of discussion because of the time, because I want to keep this length of this video controllable, because otherwise it will be difficult to save and look at it. This is 2 hours and 7 minutes long, and we are closing this particular edition at 11 minutes to 2 British Standard Time. It's midnight 49 hours on Saturday, the 1st of October 2022.